Now, who is Neil Diamond? Many people, I'm sure, are asking that question right now. This is going to be the source of our independent variables. So who is Neil Diamond? Neil Diamond is actually from way back, and currently for a lot of people is a rock star. So it's interesting because we're using the rock star of regression to examine a rock star of rock and roll. Now I can't promise this won't cause a break in the space-time continuum, but I'm pretty sure we're all right. But anyway, it's a very interesting paradox. So in terms of who he is personally, he was born in Brooklyn, New York. His best-known song, is Sweet Caroline. And his years active have been from 1958 to the present. He actually wrote for the Monkees. The I'm a Believer and all those songs for the Monkees and the Monkees TV show, he wrote for them before he started singing his own songs. So our independent variables, let's say that those three characteristics could act as our independent variables. And we would say that because he was born in Brooklyn, and Brooklyn's in New York, and New York's in the Northeast, perhaps people from the Northeast, right, item 1 here, perhaps people raised in the Northeast would be more likely to like Neil Diamond rather than people in the Southeast or the Northwest. Number 2, what if your name is Caroline? And there's a man for over 50 years going around the country singing your name and putting the adjective sweet in front of it. You might be rather flattered. So people named Caroline, yes, right? Is your name Caroline, yes, no? Yes, your name is Caroline. You might be more likely to like Neil Diamond. And what about age, right? So obviously Neil Diamond's heyday was closer to the beginning of his career. So perhaps if you know, you're a little closer to the time when his career flourished, right, which is, 30, 40 years ago, perhaps you'd be more likely to like him. Right? So here would be our three independent variables. The region you're raised, number 1. Is your name Caroline, number 2? And what's your age? Right? And again, if our outcome was, did you contract the flu, yes, no, instead of liking Neil Diamond, yes, no, you could see how the same independent variables might relate to that, at least the first and second. What region do you live in, if you're looking at epidemiology, and also your age, is age associated with contracting the flu, yes, no, right? So the construct doesn't matter. It's the structure of the variables that dictates what statistical procedure we need to do. So here's our plan for analysis, right? So you had a bunch of slides and a bunch of words, and you could break them down into this analysis map, right? So as I said, we have our independent variable 1, the region raised, right? And we're saying that people in the Northeast are most likely to like Neil Diamond. So we have our relationship arrow right here. What's the relationship between the region raised and the dependent variable? Number 2, is your name Caroline, yes, no? And what's the relation between being named Caroline and liking Neil Diamond? And what's your age, right? We'll say that our youngest person in the sample is 19 and the oldest is 78. So we have a range of 19 to 78. And how does that affect liking Neil Diamond? Yes, no, right? So we have our variables, right? Part 1, we have our variables, and we have our plan for analysis. The conceptual part is all taken care of. So step 2, we're going to be preparing our study variables. So when we prepare the study variables, we need to consider the structure of the outcome variable, and the procedure we're using, and the structure of the independent variables. And by structure, I mean, are they categorical, and what's the number of categories within the variable, and also continuous. Right? So are the variables categorical or continuous, And within the categorical variables, what are the number of categories, right? For example, the region you're raised in, right? Number one, what region of the U.S. were you raised in, right? That has more than 2 categories. And then the second one is your name, Caroline. Yes, no, so that's 2 categories. And the last one is age. So that's a continuous variable, right? We have 19 to 78, right? And as it goes up, 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 it indicates a greater presence of the construct age. So for use in our binary logistic regression model, the continuous variable is ready for use, ready to go in that model. The 2 category variable, right? The categorical variable with 2 categories, right? Is your name Caroline? Yes, no. That's ready for use in the regression model. However, number 3, the variable with more than 2 categories, is not ready for use in the regression model yet. It must be dummy coded first. Now this term dummy coded, it's really, really important to know because you'll be using it a lot, although many people don't know what it is. And it doesn't feel good to not know what this term means because it's statistics, so people a lot of the times feel a little insecure anyway, and then you don't know what it is, and while they're saying something you don't know, the term dummy is being used. So it's just not a pleasant feeling not to know what dummy coding is. So we're going to go over that tonight. And like I said, with regression models, it's used regularly. So it's an important skill to have. So important, I put a little mnemonic in here for us where we have, remember the term dummy code as in, we got a dummy, we got the ventriloquist dummy, and then we have a code, the barcode, so dummy code. So hopefully that'll stick. So how do you dummy code a variable? We take the variable, right, the original variable, and each category within that variable becomes its own separate yes-no variable. So for example, if the region you're raised in is the original variable, we're going to make each region within that variable a yes-no variable, right? So were you born in the Northeast? Yes, no. Were you born in the Southeast? Yes, no. Were you born in the Northwest? Yes, no. Right? So the one category of the original variable must be made into the reference group, right? And that's operationalized in the regression model through leaving that group out of the model. Then all the ones that are included in the regression model are referred to. So that's much easier to do than try to explain with words. So let's go forward and do that. Now in SPSS, to dummy code, you use the transform function. Now these functions, there are certain functions in SPSS or research you use continually. The transform function and the dummy coding are one of them. So specifically within the transform, we're going to use the recode into different variables. And we're going to code, for example, for the Northeast, Northeast will be 1, Southeast will be 0, and Northwest will be 0. So that will be a new variable where it's Northeast yes and not Northeast no. Okay, so let's go to SPSS and take care of this. Okay, so here we are in SPSS. Now we have a database up in the upper left. You see it's called the Like-Neil Diamond Study, right? So that's our database. And we have our variables. Here's our dependent variable, Like-Neil Diamond, yes or no. Is your name Caroline, yes or no? There are a lot of people named Caroline in this study. Interesting. And also age, right? So we have our age, and then region raised, the Northeast. So like we said, this is ready for use, that's ready for use, that's ready for use, but the categorical variable with more than 2 categories needs to be dummy coded. So what we're going to do is make Northeast its own yes-no variable right here. Then Southeast yes-no variable, and Northwest yes-no. Okay, it's a little more clear now that we can actually see. So let's go into transform and recode into different variables. Right? This is the use this all the time. So what region were you raised in? We put that there, and we give it a new name. So we just might call it Northeast. And in the database, 1 is Northeast, and in that variable I coded it. So it's 1 is Northeast, 2 is Southeast, 3 is Northwest. You have to know that. You just check it right in the database. So 1 is 1, right? And then 2, which is Southeast, is 0. And then 3, which is Northwest, is also 0. And then it's so, right? Just like on the slides, we say continue. Then we say OK. And we go back, and here we go, right? So we have region raised, and then there's Northeast, and then it's 1 is yes, and 0 is no, right? So we can actually just enter that in there, right? Just so for the sake of seeing it. And then 0 is no. Oh, whoa. There we go, it's better. And then 0 is no. So when we look at it now, we have a bunch of question marks. Okay, yes. So Northeast is yes, right? And then Southeast is no. Now we just go on and create the other 2 variables from here. All right, everybody. So it's a little boring to watch me do coding. So we coded the first one together, and now we have from region raised, right? 3 categories. Now each of those 3 is spread out in these 3 variables. So it's Northeast, yes, no, Southeast, yes, no, and Northwest, yes, no, right? So they're all dummy coded and ready for use in our regression model.